you very much. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be a recipient of this award and to be keeping such extraordinary company. I first of all want to thank all of you who are involved in making this possible. But the main thing that I want to do here is to just say how I'm inspired by the young people who are represented here, because I think that's the purpose ultimately of this foundation. And I want to tell just a brief story because Archbishop Tutu is here, one of my heroes, and let you know where I was when I was about your age. I'm really dating myself now, although I'm also dating the Archbishop, because back in 1979, I was a freshman in college at Occidental College in California. And I had had a somewhat rocky youth and teenage years. My father wasn't at home. I was growing up partly with my grandparents in high school. I'd gotten into trouble occasionally, was what my mother called a good time Charlie, meaning I wasn't really serious in terms of my studies, in terms of my work. Had some awareness of the world around me, had some sense of injustice and unfairness, but it wasn't finely honed, it wasn't well developed. And I remember in 1979 arriving as a freshman and doing what freshmen do, trying to figure out what courses are and trying to change your study habits and trying to identify that food in the cafeteria, what it is. Uh, and we were visited on campus by a couple of gentlemen from South Africa who were representatives of the ANC in 1979, 1980. And they spoke about their efforts to overcome apartheid. And for about an hour, myself and a group of students listened to these young men who were not much older than we were describe the extraordinary struggles they were going through, the sacrifices that were being made, people who were enduring jail and torture and beatings because they had a sense that somehow, some way, justice would prevail. And that brief meeting, I think, in some ways changed my life, because what it told me, first of all, was that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're given an opportunity. We sometimes think that our leaders have to have fancy degrees or well-educated or some public office somewhere. These young men had none of those things. But what they possessed was a anger over injustice that they were able to channel in a constructive, positive way. And I thought to myself that they gave me some sense of the direction that my life might go. And so I became active in the anti-apartheid movement on campuses. And I'm not sure we were particularly effective. As I recall, Occidental College continued to refuse to divest despite the various protests that we organized as students. I transferred to Columbia, and there was similar resistance on Columbia's campus. But over time, I like to think that I was part of that mosaic that applied pressure and ultimately helped those in South Africa achieve the extraordinary liberation that I would witness almost 10 years later as a law student. And I remember the image of Nelson Mandela walking out of prison and understanding that a seminal moment in history had occurred, and that Mandela's long march towards freedom was not his alone, but was part of thousands of footsteps, of millions of footsteps of people all around the world. And I trace back me getting involved in politics to that moment, because as a consequence of that organizing on a college campus, I became a community organizer. As a consequence of a community organizer, after going back to law school, became a civil rights attorney. As a consequence of being a civil rights attorney, I entered the state legislature, and I now stand before you as a United States Senator and as a candidate for president. And so the primary message I guess I have in receiving this award is that all of you represent enormous potential and enormous possibility for change, because we all know that injustice still exists. It exists here in the United States, in every poor neighborhood, and in every inner city, and every rural community, all across the country. There is quiet desperation. Young people's lives are filled with sadness and desperation and anarchy and chaos. And obviously all around the world, we see those same symptoms of hopelessness made manifest in places like Darfur, places like the Middle East, in places that too often are forgotten about and not written about until they flare up in tragedy. So I hope that all of you who are on the brink of doing extraordinary things decide to channel that talent and that energy and that imagination to figuring out how do you move the process along for a better history. How do you put your shoulder against the wheel and move that boulder up the hill? And I'm absolutely confident that if all of you take up that challenge, the world is waiting for you, ready to be changed. Because I think we live in this moment in history right now where the hunger for change, the hunger for something new, the desire to break out of the ordinary, the self-interested, the petty, the trivial, is everywhere. And they're waiting for you. And so I hope that as you see the recipients of this award, you recognize that it's actually more of a tool to give you a little spark and drive you in the wonderful directions that I hope your lives take in the years to come. So thank you very much.
Let me continue the 2016 questions. On the Republican side, and a lot of your guests are probably very intrigued by the fact that there's a candidate who's still winning and calls for a ban on Muslims, and significant segments of the population in America agree with.
Intrigued is an interesting way of putting it.
Struck. What was their reaction? That's one of my 5 questions. But the point is,
Ron, let's stick to 2.
the point is, in the past you've explained that as anger, resentment, insecurity, economic insecurity. And the question is, how much responsibility do you accept for that reservoir of feeling in the country that's propelling that sort of candidate? And a couple of weeks ago, you told Matt Lauer that Donald Trump would not win the presidency. Do you now think that he will not win the nomination as well? And what about Rubio and what about Cruz?
I think foreign observers are troubled by some of the rhetoric that's been taking place in these Republican primaries and Republican debates. I don't think it's restricted, by the way, to Mr. Trump. I mean, I find it interesting that everybody's focused on Trump primarily just because he says in more interesting ways what the other candidates are saying as well. So he may up the ante in anti-Muslim sentiment, but if you look at what the other Republican candidates have said, that's pretty troubling too. He may express strong anti-immigration sentiment, but you've heard that from the other candidates as well. You've got a candidate who sponsored a bill that I supported to finally solve the immigration problem, and he's running away from it as fast as he can. They're all denying climate change. I think that's troubling to the international community, since the science is unequivocal. And, you know, the other countries around the world, they kind of count on the United States being on the side of science and reason and common sense, because they know that if the United States does not act on big problems in smart ways, nobody will. But this is not just Mr. Trump. Look at the statements that are being made by the other candidates. There's not a single candidate in the Republican primary that thinks we should do anything about climate change, that thinks it's serious. Well, that's a problem. The rest of the world looks at that and they says, how can that be? I'll leave it to you to speculate on how this whole race is going to go. I continue to believe Mr. Trump will not be president. And the reason is because I have a lot of faith in the American people. And I think they recognize that being president is a serious job. It's not hosting a talk show or a reality show. It's not promotion. It's not marketing. It's hard. And a lot of people count on us getting it right. And it's not a matter of pandering and doing whatever will get you in the news on a given day. And sometimes it requires you making hard decisions even when people don't like it. And doing things that are unpopular. And standing up for people who are vulnerable but don't have some powerful political constituency. And it requires being able to work with leaders around the world in a way that reflects the importance of the office and gives people confidence that you know the facts, and you know their names, and you know where they are on a map, and you know something about their history. And you're not just going to play to the crowd back home because they have their own crowds back home, and you're trying to solve problems. So, yeah, during primaries, people vent and they express themselves, and it seems like entertainment, and oftentimes it's reported just like entertainment. But as you get closer, reality has a way of intruding. And these are the folks who I have faith in, because they ultimately are going to say, whoever's standing where I'm standing right now has the nuclear codes with them and can order 21-year-olds into a firefight and have to make sure that the banking system doesn't collapse, and is often responsible for not just the United States of America, but 20 other countries that are having big problems or are falling apart and are going to be looking for us to do something. The American people are pretty sensible. And I think they'll make a sensible choice in the end. Try that wine. How good can that wine be? So here's the truth. Look it up. America's pretty darn great right now. America's moving forward right now. The American people should be proud of what we achieved together right now. What we should be focused on is how we can do even better. Build on the progress we've made, not reverse it. And instead we've got a debate inside the other party that is fantasy and schoolyard taunts and selling stuff like it's the Home Shopping Network. got the Republican establishment, they're very exercised. We're shocked that somebody would be saying these things. We're shocked that somebody's banning anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-Muslim sentiment. We're shocked. We're shocked that somebody could be loose with the facts or distort someone's record. Shocked. How can you be shocked? This is the guy, remember, was sure that I was born in Kenya. Just wouldn't let it go. And all this same Republican establishment, they wouldn't say nothing. As long as it was directed and convened, they were fine with it.
Equally with the president, he's probably the worst president in the history of our country. He's a very divisive person, which is why he brings this kind of stuff up. And he should have devoted more time to working on a good nuclear deal with Iran instead of what he's doing, because he has just been a disaster for us.
Look at what's happened with Mr. Trump when he's made some of the remarks that, for example, challenged the heroism of Mr. McCain. The Republican Party is shocked. And yet, that arises out of a culture where, those kinds of outrageous attacks have become far too commonplace. The point is, we're creating a culture that is not conducive to good policy or good politics. The American people deserve better. Certainly presidential debates deserve better.
One positive thing about President Obama.
It's very hard. That's the only really tough question you've asked me this morning. That's a very hard thing to say. I'll tell you what I thought, and I really felt strongly about this. When he won the election, which, was very hard, in all fairness, for John McCain to win because Karl Rove did such a rotten job with Bush. So it was a very hard thing for anybody to win that election. So when he won, I said, at a minimum, he's going to be a great cheerleader for this country. And he's turned out to be a negative force. He's creating class warfare. He's creating all sorts of things, including the so-called Occupy movement. But when he won, I really thought, at a minimum, that he was going to be a great cheerleader for the country. And he's not even a good cheerleader.
There's a vicious rumor floating around that I think could really hurt Mitt Romney. I heard he passed universal health care when he was governor of Massachusetts. Someone should get to the bottom of that. And I know just the guy to do it. Donald Trump is here tonight. Now, I know that he's taken some flack lately, but no one is happier, no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac? All kidding aside, obviously we all know about your credentials and breadth of experience.
He didn't kill Bin Laden. He gets so much credit for that. Okay, excuse me. Excuse me.
He had the guts to make that decision.
And the genius, excuse me, guts. You're sitting in the White House. They come to you, and here's the question. We can take him out. We have him. You're the president. We can take him out with a missile or we can go get him. Now, the third thing is leave him alone. And nobody, only a very stupid person would say that. So we can take him out with a missile, we can do either way. Either way, it's okay. All right? Either way, it's okay. So he said, all right, let's go get him. Why does he get so much credit? You know, they give him credit for that. He shouldn't get so much credit. He happened to be sitting in that.
It wasn't a slam dunk.
Excuse me.
You remember Jimmy
Excuse
Carter
me.
and
Jimmy
the
Carter
hostage
was
rescue?
Jimmy Carter was incompetent. Look, very nicely. We can take him out with a missile or we can pick him up. He's sitting in the White House. These military guys who were there long before he was there, they found him. Now, the bad news is Pakistan should have told us this years before because they knew exactly where he was. He's sitting right next to one of their major military bases. So, I mean, for them not to have told us is very insulting. But I don't know why Obama gets credit for the whole bin Laden thing. He's sitting there. He's got three choices. Leave him alone, which nobody would do. Take him out with a missile or take him out with the military. So he said, take him out with the military. Okay. Congratulations.
If it would have failed, it would have been a disaster.
The ones who should get the, no, it would have been a disaster. He could have failed, but he didn't. He's not the one that
Some
made
of those
it
Navy
successful.
SEALs would have been killed.
They were great. They were great.
But
They're great guys.
It was a dangerous mission.
They're great guys. But anybody in that position, sitting, happened to be president, if you walk in and say, we have bin Laden, we can either get him this way or that way. Either, honestly, either solution's okay. I almost think the other would have been better, except this way there's a little more proof. And a lot of people disagree with what happened after the fact and the way he was treated so solemnly. I mean, they treated him so solemnly after the fact. Cleanse the body, wash the body. I mean, give me a break. But anybody sitting in that office, Wolf, would have done. So I keep hearing about, oh, bin Laden. The military did an incredible job. And they called him and they said, we have him. And he said, go get him. What's he going to say? Don't get him? And he gets all this credit?
So what's this thing with Trump and you? I don't. It's like me and Letterman. What has he got against you here? I don't get it. You know.
This all dates back to when we were growing up together in Kenya.
Yeah. I gotta give you that one.
We had, constant run-ins on the soccer field. And, he wasn't very good and resented it.
Yeah.
Have you? When we finally moved to America, I thought it'd be over.
Yeah.
But
No. Have you met him? I know you're been in the same room. I saw you at the correspondence. Have you met him?
I haven't actually.
You haven't actually met
No,
him.
I have not.
Okay.
It's maybe more than what's good for the country, but ultimately what's good for the country is to get a new president, because we have a president now that has made this country the laughing stock of the world. Right now, if he ran, you'd beat him. Anybody would beat him because this has been such a mess and it's been so bad for him. It shows he's not so great, okay? So anybody would beat him. If this happened again, but you have a very short memory. I mean, people have a short memory. Everybody has a short memory. You go to Saudi Arabia. You go to China. You go to Abu Dhabi. You want to see airports. You want to see structures. You want to see roads. It's unbelievable. They're paved in gold. Then you go to LaGuardia Airport. It's like from a third world country. You go to Kennedy Airport. You go to Newark Airport.
But how did that
you go
happen?
to Los
How did
Angeles.
that
You go to LAX.
How did that happen? And that predates even President Obama. I mean, that predates President Obama.
It does. We've had bad leadership. Hey, look, was I ever a big fan of Bush? I wasn't, okay? The fact is we've had horrible leadership, but right now we have probably the worst leader we've ever had, especially when it comes to rebuilding our once great country. We're not a great country anymore. Everyone's talking about investment. The other day I had somebody up, oh, here's where you should invest. Where? China, India. So what about the United States? I want to invest. Well, that's much less. Invest in China, invest in India, invest in every country but our country. Now, these are Wall Street geniuses, and they say, put your money here, but they don't want to invest their money in this country.
How about Steve
They have
Wynn?
no confidence in this country. We're laughed at. I mean, what's being abused, it's being taken advantage of, and it's being run by incompetent people.
All right. Well, if you look, or is it they don't understand business, or because of the uncertainty of sort of the politics of the world? What is it?
I think it's everything, but I think it's also the fact that our leaders are not as smart as leaders in other countries. They are not.
Are you saying he's stupid?
I'm not saying anything.
Well, you keep saying the president isn't smart.
I don't think. Well, he's certainly not smart when it comes to business. He's certainly not smart when it comes to running a country. I don't think this country has ever been so disrespected as we are right now. Other countries are laughing at us. I deal with these people. I like them. They're friends of mine. Even some of the leaders, I know them. I respect them. I think they respect me. I don't hold it against them. I mean, I wish our people would be able to do what they're doing. You look at what's going on. You order products. It's from China. It's from all over the
What
world.
do you think the president thinks about that?
I don't think he thinks about it. I mean, all he does is campaign. I think what he is, he's a pretty good campaigner. I don't think he's a great campaigner, by the way, because actually Hillary was really, kicking his ass at the end. I mean, she got started late. She should have done what she did. But he really limped across that line. I don't think he's a great campaigner. I think he's a good campaigner. I think that's his strength, is campaigning. He never made a deal in his life except for his house in Chicago, which is a very suspect deal. He's very bad for this country.
Example, no, seriously, just recently in an episode of Celebrity Apprentice at the steakhouse, the men's cooking team did not impress the judges from Omaha Steaks. And there was a lot of blame to go around, but you, Mr. Trump, recognized that the real problem was a lack of leadership. And so ultimately you didn't blame Little John or Meatloaf. You fired Gary Busey. And these are the kind of decisions that would keep me up at night. Well handled, sir. Well handled. Say what you will about Mr. Trump. He certainly would bring some change to the White House. Let's see what we've got up there.
Rare politicians actually admit mistakes. You've admitted you made mistakes in the past.
I have.
Well, you and I talked about President Obama and the whole birth certificate thing.
I didn't say it was a mistake. I just said I don't want to talk
No, I'm asking you now, do you accept that President Obama was born in the United States, is not Muslim?
I really don't know. I mean,
You don't know.
I don't know why he wouldn't release his records. But, honestly, I don't want to get into it. He came up with this thing all of a sudden miraculously. Remember this one thing. I'm only going to get one thing because I'm about jobs, the economy, and I'm about the military and taking care of our vets.
Still don't know.
No, let me just tell you something. Do you know that Hillary Clinton was a birther? She wanted those records and fought like hell. People forgot. Do you know that John McCain was a birther? Wanted those records? They couldn't get the records. Hillary failed. John McCain failed. Trump was able to get him to give something. I don't know what the hell it was, but it doesn't matter because I'm off that subject. I'm about jobs. I'm about the military. I'm about doing the right thing for this country. I want to make our country great.
In 18 months, I'm turning over the keys. I want to make sure I'm turning over the keys to somebody who is serious about the serious problems that the country faces and the world faces.
People of India are going crazy that President Obama was constantly chewing gum. And then on top of that, he took it out of his mouth, put it back. You can't do it. It's disgusting.